If you want to see a true crime sleuth go from morbidly manic to mouth-frothingly angry, there are a few names that you can say, but there's one in particular which really raises the ire of us, and that is Casey Anthony. She earned the moniker the most hated woman in America and did absolutely nothing for the reputation that Florida has of producing the most ludicrous, trashy people on the face of this earth. As she was acquitted of capital murder, I'm sure that in YouTube lawland and real-life lawland, I've got to make it abundantly clear that she was acquitted of capital charges, therefore, in the eyes of the law, she is considered innocent of this particular crime. But let's be real here. Casey obviously killed Kaylee. Now, there are more than enough YouTube videos on here which will detail exactly what happened with Casey Anthony and poor little Kaylee Anthony, and I would highly recommend you go and get all of the full facts of the case from those other videos. There are videos that cover the mind-numbing lies and very oddly specific lies that Casey told all throughout the investigation, and not just throughout the investigation, seemingly throughout her entire existence. You know, ever since she had the ability to speak out of her pathological lying mouth. Not only that, but her family seemed to be on a consistent diet of gullibility juice and stupid pills, which meant that somehow Casey would time and time again get away with her insane web of lies. We could argue that, actually, the family's propensity to believing Casey's lies was really the beginning domino which fell and led into a sequence of events that ended in poor little Kaylee Anthony's death. The surprise isn't all this and a fake job at Universal Studios. The bigger surprise is just how the bloody hell Casey got acquitted of the crime in the first place. The evidence against her, while nothing forensically conclusive, all of it was considered circumstantial evidence. But the prosecution team being the experts, you'd think that they'd be able to look at all of that evidence and secure a conviction which was appropriate for what she did. So, let's look at it. As you true crime fans already know, the process of bringing capital charges against somebody is a very, very long slog of filings, motions. It takes time. The whole thing is incredibly lengthy. All while that's happening, Casey is sitting in jail. The longer she sits in jail during this process, the longer she is considered to have had her time served. And this will be important throughout this investigation. In the lead up to this, charges are filed against her. And in this case, the charges were first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and providing false information to a law enforcement officer. It's kind of important to know, but what constitutes first-degree murder? Premeditated and intentional killing. Do you see the problem yet? Because the prosecution didn't. Bringing a charge of first-degree murder instead of, say, second-degree murder really ups the ante in terms of the burden of proof required to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person is guilty. It's a bit like passing your driving test and immediately booking it over to NASCAR. Yeah, in theory it's just turning left, but obviously there's more to it than that. You know, instead of just doing a sedate drive up the M1 with your mum in the passenger seat. In order to convict Casey of first-degree murder in the death of her daughter Kaylee Anthony, the prosecution needs to prove beyond a reasonable doubt via the evidence to a real-life jury that she's guilty. The emphasis is on planned and intentional. They have to prove that she planned this. Was there any evidence in discovery which definitively and distinctly proves that this was planned? We all know from the verdict of the case the answer is nope. There was a lot, if not all, circumstantial evidence which was provided in discovery, which, when added together, demonstrate an accidental killing of Kaylee versus a premeditated and intentional one. Why is it when this was all presented to the prosecution, they had access to all of the discovery documents, why is it that the prosecution decided to go with first-degree murder and not second-degree murder? There's some possible options. Maybe it was the media hype. Maybe it was wanting to see Casey's stupid, smug face hit the floor like her boyfriend's career prospects. Maybe it was just wanting to have another capital prosecution charge under their belts. Whatever the reason, the prosecution significantly dropped the ball on this one. And they didn't just drop the ball. They dropped it into a pile of steaming vomit, then booted it off the side of a cliff, and it landed in someone's tea. And that someone is everyone who's never killed their child. The facts, as supported by the evidence, were these. Despite finding Kaylee's body, because of the time that it took to discover her body from the moment that it was dumped, a long period of time occurred, and it was over summer as well. So any definitive forensic data that could have possibly come from Kaylee's body was erased. Even now, we still don't know exactly what the cause of death for little Kaylee was. The prosecution argued that she was suffocated to death through the duct tape being wrapped around her head, but the defence argued that she drowned in the family pool. Because the body gave no forensic information about this, it was impossible to determine exactly what was the cause of death for Kaylee. We know for a fact that Casey did take 31 days to report her daughter missing. And Casey provably lied all throughout the investigation to detectives about pretty much everything. My particular favourite lie of all of this is that she worked for Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida, and she had the gall and incredible confidence to walk the detectives through the offices themselves, waving at random people there, smiling at random employees, pretending like she knew them, until she walked them into a dead end. Oh, I don't really work here. She was forced to come clean at that point. Now, what gets me about this particular lie is the amount of effort and time that Casey actually put into pretending she had a job at Universal Studios. She created fake email accounts, fake numbers. She'd set up fake meetings and then they'd get cancelled so that she could prove to everyone around her that she was actually working this events coordinator job at Universal Studios. All this effort that she spent, she could have just had a real job. At any point, she could have just worked for Universal Studios. Maybe not as an events coordinator, but she could have had a real genuine job and she wouldn't have needed to fake all of this. Now, even by all of the circumstantial evidence as outlined previously, a second-degree murder charge is going to make so much more sense, and it really lowers the burden of proof required from the prosecution in order to prove that Kaylee's death was as a result of reckless abandon on the base of Casey Anthony towards her. We know that Kaylee was definitively within Casey's care at the time, and even if her claim of a woman that definitely didn't exist called Zenaida Gonzalez or Zanny the Nanny, even if all of that were true and this woman really did exist, then abandoning her for 31 days for Zenaida Gonzalez to take her on the theme park tour of a lifetime would still constitute reckless abandon. I mean, even if that were true and the Mary Poppins of Orlando really did that, then it's Casey's responsibility to know where her daughter is. So not reporting it for 31 days absolutely constitutes reckless abandon. All in all, this looks like a slam dunk case for a second-degree murder charge. So if the prosecution had decided to file those charges, we'd be able to send Casey thousands of photos of our middle fingers. Instead, all we've got are late-night drunken rants about how she should be in prison. And now I can't think about Universal Studios without picturing her annoying, smug face. Now, I'm all for theorising about what happened to little Kaylee, but we have to take it with respect in mind that this was a poor little girl that had her life ripped from her. And unfortunately, because Casey was acquitted of first-degree murder because of double jeopardy laws, we can't bring this same case to the court system. So I'm happy to theorise about what I think happened, but rest in peace, little Kaylee. Now, I think that Casey's usual babysitting style involved Xanax and putting Kaylee in the back of a locked car so that she could go out and MC hot body contests and party her life away. Casey, being the colossal shithead that she is, obviously overdosed her daughter and then just left her body in the car, just to allow it to putrefy in the car, to the point where the smell would be so overwhelming that even people without functioning noses would be able to smell it. This is the same Casey Anthony, who tried to argue that pretty much every boyfriend she's ever had has died in a car accident. Obviously, Casey then realised that she couldn't continue to conceal Kaylee's body in the car anymore and decided to dump it near to her parents' house, because there's being lazy and then there's Casey Anthony. Once she had dumped poor little Kaylee's body, then she went back to emceeing hot body contests and going back to partying. You know, like innocent people don't do when their children go missing. I've got to say the word disappointing is an underwhelming word to describe how I feel about this case. I think, unfortunately, it's, as much as Casey very obviously did have a role in Kaylee's death, I think the fact that the prosecution didn't, get their heads screwed on in time to think, right, we've got a case for second-degree murder, not first-degree murder. If anything, it's the prosecution's fault. They were supposed to know better. And yet they let Barbie from hell walk out of court with that smug grin plastered across her face. Casey is single again and is planning on writing a book and having a film made about her life. And she's expressed she wants more kids.
Bruh.
I've got a little PSA in light of this new information about Casey Anthony. PSA time. Men of America, I know lockdown is lonely. I know you just want to be able to see people and feel people. I know Casey has a somewhat symmetrical face and is female. Don't date Casey Anthony. Don't give her children. Don't place children within her.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Go to the local swamp or area like that, pick out a very small crocodile, paint some lipstick on the face and date the little crocodile, because that little creature is less dangerous than dating Casey Anthony.
Gotcha, bitch!
Everybody else, don't pay for a book or film. Just don't. If it involves Casey Anthony, just don't. Getting coughed in the face is more worth it right now than giving money to Casey Anthony. As horrific as this crime was and is, and the fact that Kaylee doesn't get to grow up, she doesn't get to live her life because of the actions of a certain witch, there's always a lesson in these things, so let's find it. If you want a YOLO life, condoms are great. So is yeeting your ovaries. So Casey, yeet your ovaries. Yeet your ovaries, Casey. Yeet them. I just wanted to say that this is the 4th time I'm doing this video, because I didn't just completely mess it up the first time or the second time or the third time. I messed it up all those times, and this is the 4th time doing this. So I have spoken about Casey Anthony in the sort of confines of my own office so many times that I feel like the name Casey Anthony is losing all meaning. So I hope that this was coherent and actually made sense. Also, 100 subscribers, which is amazing. Thank you very much to everybody who has liked and subscribed. And as always, if you do want to give me any feedback, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about this. Maybe you think Casey actually is innocent. Maybe you think there's something to this case that I've overlooked, in which case, get down in the comments. Thank you very much, fellow sickos, and I hope you're enjoying your time in lockdown and in isolation. Just make sure that if it involves Casey Anthony, you just don't. And also, Casey, yeet your ovaries.